And welcome back to Capital Tonight on Budget Day. Well, we knew it was coming. Andrew Cuomo made absolutely no secret of his plans to target two of Albany's sacred cows, education and health care. And today he made good on his threats, proposing cuts to both worth just under $3 billion. Joining me tonight to talk more about the impact of these reductions, if they are in fact enacted exactly as the governor envisions, are advocates from both areas. Dan Sisto is the president of the Healthcare Association of New York State. He is also a member of the governor's Medicaid Redesign Task Force. And then across the table from him is Tim Kremer. He is the executive director of the State School Boards Association. Gentlemen, thanks very much for your time. I appreciate it, given the weather and the news that you received today. I want to start with you, Dan, because you and I had a conversation not so terribly long ago where we spoke about the Medicaid task force, and you said, I'm worried that it's going to be difficult for us. We don't know the target number yet. Now you know the target number, and it's difficult.
It's impossible. Difficult would have been $2 billion. That was rumored in state savings at the time we spoke. Now we hear it's closer to $3 billion, $2.85 billion. For every dollar lost from the state, we lose another dollar from the federal government.
Right.
And over 2 years, it totals $15 billion. Now, over the last 3 years, we've had 7 different budget fights. Cumulatively, they came to a little over $5 billion. Now they want 15 in 2 years. The federal government, under the new health reform law, is also going to be cutting Medicare in New York, roughly $1 billion a year on average for 10 years. So the 30 hospitals that have closed and the 50 nursing homes that have closed in the last 10 years, more frequently in nursing homes upstate, that pace is going to accelerate.
The governor specifically talked about home health care. I mean, it was kind of actually, I have to confess, I couldn't actually really follow it all that well. It was complicated, which it speaks to actually how complicated this issue is. This whole issue of health care, of reimbursement rates, of who gets paid who for what and what people can get, et cetera. But he was talking about, I think the upshot that he was saying was, it's not about the bottom line for home health care agencies. Now, I know that you are talking about, we're talking about a whole different sort of industry here. He said it should be about people. It's about providing care for people. Is home health care an area where there can be cuts?
Well, actually, the whole, I think, thrust of the Medicaid reform team that he started with was the right one. Let's try and avoid across-the-board cuts. Let's redesign the health system. Okay. And that's certainly going to mean transforming some of home care and the way it's paid for, as he said, and as well as nursing homes and hospitals, too. But that kind of transformation has to happen in some incremental steps. And I'm simply saying that the magnitude of what he's proposing is so vast that it will lead to closing rather than transforming many of these institutions.
Okay, let's come back to this just one second. Tim, I want to talk to you. You don't have the benefit of a redesigned task force. And interestingly, this budget is a little vague on the details when it comes to how you're going to get there. You say not possible, but he says you're going to somehow, industry, get to $3 billion, or I'm just going to bluntly chop you all off at the knees, right? You guys all get bluntly chopped off at the knees, essentially.
Well, yeah. I acknowledge that we spend too much, taxes are high. I think the governor is dealing with this very difficult situation, and he sounded very reasonable. He used humor and some other things in his presentation, but I think he downplayed certainly the cut to public education as we saw it. He talked about a $1.5 billion cut, and he acted as if that was a 2.9% decrease. Well, 2.9% is not against state aid. It's against federal, state, and local aid, the whole amount of money that we spent on public education.
Right.
If you took the $1.5 billion cut and applied it to just the state aid, it's 7.3% cut. It's a lot bigger than the 2.9 he's been portraying.
Well, there's another multiplying factor actually for you, and that's the property tax cap, correct?
Well, that came yesterday, and
Well, only in the Senate, though, so.
Only in the Senate, and it's a year out. And for that, I am thankful. I'm glad it wasn't embedded in the budget, and I'm glad we have a year to think about it. I happen to be on it's the Mandate Relief Redesign Team, I believe it's called.
Right.
And we are talking about different things, and hopefully we can develop some. We won't have the same sort of thing that Medicaid is, where they're reinventing themselves, but we might look at some different ways of addressing some of our cost drivers that are reasonable and maybe will allow us to accommodate some of these cuts.
Okay, there was I thought a membership poll that you guys had earlier in which your members seemed to be warming to the concept of this competitive nature that he's talking about, allocation of aid to people. He complained about the fact, and I'm not so sure that it actually pertains to the healthcare industry, but that it's not based on performance, that every year I send you a check and I send you a check and I send you a check. That was what the governor said, instead of incentivizing you and rewarding you when the kids in your school do well.
Yeah, I don't know if this is being overplayed or maybe it's an omen of what is to come. But he's only taken $500 million out of all of the state funding and saying we're going to make that available in a competitive grant sort of scheme. Half of it would go to those who show student improvement where you're beating the odds, and half of it for administrative efficiencies where you've really shown a new way of doing business. And we kind of applaud him for that. We've always said we should optimize our resources, embrace new ways of doing business that are good for kids, teaching and learning.
Well, it's like race to the top, isn't it, kind of? It's like the federal race to the top?
It is. The only difference is race to the top, you got the money in advance with the promise that you were going to do certain things.
I see.
This is, I'm told, a reward for having already done it.
Okay, so Dan, if you say it's impossible...
Well, the number. I mean, we can certainly restructure the system. We can make savings. The reason the number becomes impossible is because the governor's saying we're only going to spend X dollars. But both the federal government and the state government have very intense programs to expand enrollment in Medicaid.
Right. Well, let me ask you about that, because
the benefits, the eligibility expansions.
Sure. So under health care reform,
right.
Is that what you mean? So go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, last time I was here, I mentioned to you they confuse rates and costs and expenditures.
You did,
right? So you have a child in college, you pay $30,000. Next year, you have 2 children, you pay $60,000. Your costs didn't go up. Your expenditures went up.
Right.
What the governor's saying is we're going to cap what we expend. But since we're going to enroll more people, right, unless you can find the savings somewhere else, then he's going to cut the hospitals, the nursing homes, the home care, and keep cutting them while they keep expanding the number of people. What I'm saying is, wait a minute, take a deep breath, step back. Don't taint us all like we're scam artists, which is what the message he put out yesterday to set up this budget. These so-called schemes that he used as examples were things put in place by 4 governors and numerous legislators to expand the population who get Medicaid. The federal government agrees to say we're going to do away with a panel of economists in New York that used to limit how much we spent. They said, oh, well, they give you too much. We're going to set it by the cost of living. And then every year we've been cut that for years and years. So we're looking at 0% increases for the last several years in terms of our rates. The government is saying we're spending too much. Well, then we have to restructure what you're promising.
Okay, 2 questions from that. First of all, is it possible to do the cuts that he is asking you to do without reducing the number of people on the rolls for Medicaid? For example, the Arizona governor has done that, has said, I would like to remove people. Federal government, please give me permission.
He has to get permission, right?
Right. You need, well, there are a number of things that you need permission for from the federal government vis-a-vis Medicaid. Not so with education, actually, so it makes it easier. But can you? Can you get there?
I would rather look, it takes several years to restructure the health system. You can't do it overnight. There's savings to be achieved there. I know there'll be some cuts on hospitals, nursing homes, and home care. I would rather not try and throw people off Medicaid eligibility. They're there because of the recession. But I think we have to be honest about what it takes, do our best to restructure. We're also going to have to, when he gives a number this high, that's the shocker, you know, what to me is $6 billion this year, 15 in the next 2.
Right.
Then it's time to also think about the revenue side of this. To say that we're going to, you know, I know there's a committee to protect New York. To me, it's the committee to protect New York's wealthy. To put up money to say we're going to defend the governor who defends us from paying the surcharge that we have now on our taxes, but we're going to cut $15 billion here and take money out of education. You know, sick children can't learn. But we need healthy schools. This
is something that you have also said, I believe, that the education community has said. The millionaire's tax, that's what you're talking about, correct? The millionaire's tax, the extension of the millionaire's tax, is that something also that you would like to see?
We have not been out there advocating for that, actually. I know that there have been organizations like NICET,
And
AQE,
right.
And others who have been big advocates on that. That has not been a place where we've gone. We've actually been looking at the cost side and saying we have to deal with some of these costs. Additional revenues would certainly be helpful, but we have to find ways to reduce some of our costs.
Well, and also it's only $1 billion in the current year and $4 to $5 billion in the next fiscal year, and so it's not going to help you as much as, I mean, it's not going to help everyone. In other words, $3 billion from you and $3 billion from you. That's now we're talking about $6 billion minus the federal matching that you've talked about, and so just the state share alone, it's not going to solve the problem. And then you have on top of that the municipalities that are getting cut 2%, and New York City getting all of its municipal aid reduced. I mean, could be spent over and over in a number of ways.
And that loss of federal aid is very important. That 1.5%, or excuse me, $1.5 billion cut in state aid is a number worth noting. But the bigger number and the more important number for us is this gap elimination adjustment, which says you got $1.5 billion in state aid we're going to take away. And we acknowledge that we're not going to have those federal dollars coming in, which is another $1.3 billion. Now we're up to $2.8 billion less that will be spent on public education from one year to the next because of the loss in state aid plus the loss in federal aid.
Which is a problem that both of you actually have from federal stimulus dollars, correct? Okay,
exactly.
Let me ask this, and just in closing, because unfortunately we're out of time. Is it possible, and it sounds to me like what you're saying, Dan, is that we might be able to get to a $3 billion cut, but we can't do it in a year.
What I'm saying is the Medicaid Redesign Task Force cannot come up with substitutes for the cuts of that magnitude. That's what I'm saying. There's not enough alternative places to save money.
So what should do?
Well, it's going to take some cuts, some redesign, a more reasonable transition. But, you know, he set the number, $2.85 billion this year. Like I'm saying, it translates to $6 billion.
Right.
Maybe I'm saying that number's wrong. I was worried when the rumor was $2.1 billion. The magnitude of it is too great. It is going to impair the health system.
Do you feel similarly about the quality of education and the capability of the system to educate children if the cuts go through as is?
It's going to be tough. I wish I knew more about how this is going to be distributed across the state. I don't have that information yet because we have 700 school districts of all different wealth factors and all of the different poverty and tax burdens and things like that. Once we see that, there are districts that could accommodate some cuts. There are other districts that are living so close to the bone, they're so dependent upon state aid, they have nowhere else to go, and if they get a significant cut, it's really going to be difficult for them to put it together.
Okay, so I'm not surprised to hear either of you say this, but the magnitude certainly surprised everyone, I believe, and we'll be revisiting this again, I'm sure. I want to thank you both. Tim Kremer, thank you very much, and Dan Sisto, thanks so much for your time. I appreciate it.